Hey guys, it's Sam Limon back again with another tutorial. This tutorial is for my level 2 digital imaging class. This is for the portfolio builders assignment, the photo touch-up project. So this tutorial involves photo touch-ups and retouching in Photoshop. So what I did is I created a package of several photos that all need some sort of correction so that you guys could fix them up, make them better. So first thing we're going to do is if you go onto Schoology and we go into our class, go ahead and go to the digital imaging class, and these might be in a different spot. I'll let you know. So just go ahead and find it, and this is going to be the name of it. So it is touchupphotos.zip, so it's a zip file. So go ahead and download it. Again, click it once, it takes you to this page, and then we go to touch-up photos zip again, and then we can see at the bottom here it downloaded. So that goes straight to your downloads folder. So now what I want to do is go into my downloads folder. I'm going to right click and open downloads, and then so my downloads show up. So I just have to find that, and it's touch up photos. Here it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it out onto my desktop. Go ahead and drag it out into your USB drive or your external hard drive. And I'm going to close my downloads. I'm going to open up my working folder, and then I'm just going to go ahead and drag this package file into my working folder. And now what I'm going to do is go ahead and double click it to unzip it. If you're on a PC, you're going to have to go in there and you're going to have to click extract. I believe it shows up on the top of the folder and it'll say extract all. So that means you will be able to extract all these images. So let me show you first of all these images. Just a quick little preview. So on this one we have some red eye issues. So that's pretty common in photography. If the flash hits the pupils, the eyes, in the correct angle, and then you're going to get this in the photograph. And then we also have a missing tooth, so I'm going to have you guys practice with that. We also have this image that is very dark, so we're going to brighten it up a bit. Another image where we're going to go in and fix a few of the blemishes on her face. The same thing here. I just want you guys to get used to, doing some photo editing. And here's another one with the image correction, with the eye correction, sorry, on the red eyes as well. And we're going to enhance this image a bit as well, this landscape one. This one's a little bit dark. This one's a little bit too bright. And another bright one. Okay, so once we preview all these, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and open up Photoshop. I already have Photoshop running in the background. And I'm going to go to File, Open. And I'm going to navigate to my touch-up photos. And I'm just going to take these one by one. You could go ahead and open all of these at the same time and then create Photoshop files out of them. I'm going to do one at a time. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on this first one, open it. And first thing before anything, we notice that this is a JPEG file. So what we're going to do is go to File, Save As. And then we're going to change the format or the type. I believe in PCs it says type. Change that to Photoshop. Make sure it's Photoshop and not Photoshop EPS or Photoshop PDF. It's usually going to be the first one on top. And then in PCs it might say .psd. So go ahead and choose Photoshop. And let's go and hit Save. So now essentially what we did, if we go back to our Finder or to our folder, I had these. It's going to have the same name to it. However, one's going to be the JPEG and one's going to be the Photoshop file. So now we're working on our Photoshop file, which is going to, accept all of our layers. It'll be able to read it back once we open it in Photoshop. So first thing that you notice is there are some red eyes. So Photoshop has a tool nested under the spot healing brush tool. Most of these tools that we're going to be using are in this area. So just look for the little band-aid. If you have your toolbar like this, it's going to be this one. If you click and hold to find all these nested tools, you're going to find the red eye tool. So if you click on that one, And you can mess around with these settings up in the options bar. So we have our pupil size, darkening amount, and we're just going to leave these at 50 and see what happens, and we'll adjust accordingly if we need to. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little. So I'm doing Command or Control plus, and I'm going to put my cursor right over the red eye and just click it, and boom, what do you know, it does a pretty good job, almost like magic. So let's go ahead and do the next one, and it does a pretty good job. So that takes care of that. But since we are graphic designers, we should, think of other ways to like further enhance these images. So for the sake of making it better, let's go ahead and make the eyes pop a little more. So one thing we could do is we could just grab our brush tool, which is right here, and I'm going to go ahead and select it, and I'm going to change the size down a little bit. So I'm going to bring it down. I could either do this way, or I could use the left or right brackets to make it smaller. And I'm going to just go ahead and zoom into one of these eyes for now. Let's make my brush a little bit smaller. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my opacity down to about 10%. Doesn't have to be exact, but somewhere around there. And then I'm going to choose a color. Make sure we're on our top color right here, on our foreground color, not on our background color. And since her eyes are like a little bit greenish, more towards the greenish side, let's go ahead and find a nice green, a darkish green. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK on that one. I'll make my brush size a little bit bigger, and I'm just going to slowly paint her eyes in. In this space, I don't want to go too much into the skin or into the pupil itself, so I could make my brush size a little bit smaller just to get this area. And then I'm going to go ahead and bump it up. Again, I'm using my right or left bracket keys to make my brush size bigger or smaller. And again, you could go up here and drag the slider for the size. And I'm going to go ahead and brush this in. So now we have a slight green cast over that eye. So now I'm going to navigate to the other eye, and I'm going to do the same thing essentially. Just brush in that light 10% of green. And again, if you want to, go and do these little spots. Now, one thing to notice is it's at 10%. So every time you click, if you keep clicking, it's just going to go green and green. So eventually you're going to get to a point where it's too much. So I literally just did like one slight coat of it. So at this point, I'm going to do Command Z a few times, or Control Z, and go back to remove all that. And I'm good there. We just wanted to enhance it just ever so slightly. If you start doing too much, then you kind of defy the purpose of Photoshop to where, it starts looking unnatural. So the whole goal of this is we want to make it better, but we do not want to go overboard. And now, let's think about how we could fix this missing tooth. So there's a couple ways. We could essentially copy this tooth and make a new layer and drag it over. And that's what I would do. I would create a new layer, copying this tooth, and that way we could preserve the original image if we ever need to go back to it, and show this image without with the missing tooth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a selection. I'm going to grab my marquee tool, my rectangular marquee tool, and just make a selection that's a little bit bigger than the tooth. So we want to pick up a few pixels around it. So we want to pick up a little bit of the gum, of the lips, and the surrounding teeth. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the quick command to copy just this selection into a new layer, and that is Command J or Control J. So if I do that, if you see in our layers panel, it automatically creates a new layer, and it's just the tooth. I'm going to go ahead and rename this layer to tooth, or tooth fix. Hit return. Now I'm going to get my move tool, and I can literally click this and drag it over. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit by hitting Command plus or Control plus. And at this point, what I could do is either mask off some of the edges, or I could go ahead and erase them. I personally like using the mask tool. So we're gonna go ahead and do that, and I suggest you guys get more used to using the mask tool, or just the masking. That way we, preserve anything around here that we might want to use later. I don't see why we would, but it's good practice to do. So if you want to go ahead and click on adding a layer mask on our adding a layer mask icon, which is this one right here. It's a black square with the white circle in the middle. And now what we want to do is we want to get a brush. We want to open up our brush tool. We want to make sure our foreground color is black. So if it is not, you could double click on here and drag it down to the bottom left. Make sure we're on black and click OK. We also want to make sure we're selected on our layer mask, not on our actual layer. And you could tell by these bounding box over here. So I want to make sure I'm on my layer mask. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start painting on the outside edges to erase it. One thing that I noticed is I had left my opacity at 10%, so the brush is masking at 10%, so it's going to take a while to get there. So let's go ahead and bring our opacity back up to 100. And now let's slowly start masking away these extra pixels that we got. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit further. Maybe not so much. And then I'm going to go ahead and make my brush a little bit smaller. So again, using my left or right bracket keys. And I notice this is just copying that exactly. So I want to get rid of that and bring in, some of what we already have. That way it's not looking exactly like this side. We want to mask around this area to bring in like that original gum behind here, and get this dark area out. Again, I'm going to make it really small and go tighten up right up to the edge of that tooth. I could do that right here as well. If you notice, I have some left over here, so let me get rid of that. And the good thing about the mask is if you go too far, and if I accidentally do this, if I switch these colors, if I go to white, remember black hides, white shows. So I could just go back and bring back what's underneath that mask. So I could bring that back. Now let's go ahead and turn the eye off and on to see where we're at. And you could see we missed a few little pixels right here. Usually it's not noticeable, but it's a good idea to clean those up. So let's go ahead and make sure we're back on black. The quick command to switch these colors is X. So if I hit X, I could toggle between showing and hiding. So right now we want to hide the pixels as we're still working on our mask. I'm going to just go ahead and paint along this area, paint this area, and you could turn it off and on and see where we're at. Hide this a little bit. And there, I think that looks a little bit better. Let's go ahead and zoom out. So the object of this is not to make it perfect, it's just to make it better. If you wanted to, we could think about, we could flip this tooth horizontally. So again, if we're working on our mask, we don't want to flip our mask horizontal, we want to select the whole layer. So go ahead and select the layer. And then now if we do our transform tool, which is either edit and go to actually free transform, or command or control T. And then if we right click on it, and we could flip it horizontal, and we could manipulate it there, rotate it a little bit, we could make it a little bit bigger that way. Hold shift if you want it to just stretch to the side like that, because if not, it's gonna bring it up proportionally. I'm gonna do command Z to undo that, bring it out a little. One thing that's bugging me, maybe it's that little gap there, but I feel like that's kind of okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and accept this. So either hit return or hit this check mark up here. And so that placed it at a little bit better angle. Turn it off and on. And actually, now that I look at it, that little gap doesn't bug me as much because we have it on this left side. So, and understand, you know, we're humans, nothing's going to match exactly. But like I said, we're just trying to make this better. And there we go. So that's it for that one. So you could go ahead and close it and save it. And then now let's go ahead and open up our next image. So if we go to File, Open. And so our first two, let me change the view on these so we see what we're looking at. Change these to icons. So let's go ahead and open up our next image. So it's this one, the underexposed image. Go ahead and open that. So one thing we could do, don't follow along with me just yet. Let me just show you this. So if I go to Image, Adjustments, and for example, if I just go to Brightness and Contrast, I could increase the brightness. Let's just take it up all the way and then click OK. But now if you notice, this is a permanent change. So the whole image was affected by that, and we cannot go back unless we do Command or Control Z. But think about if we go forward, you know, 50 steps with other changes, the way to get back, you know, you'd have to start from the beginning and you would lose all those changes. So what I'm going to do now is do Command or Control Z to undo that. And what I want to do is add an adjustment layer. So that creates a new layer on top that's going to do that same exact adjustment. And it's going to be non-destructive because we could turn that layer off or on. If you noticed before, it was still the single layer. So what we're going to do is go to our adjustment layer icon down in our layers panel, which is that yin yang looking sign, half white, half black. Go ahead and drop that down. And if you wanted to go to your brightness and contrast now, see how it creates this adjustment layer. And now if we do our brightness all the way up, the image looks the same. However, if we do 50 more steps, we could always come back and turn this one off if we needed to. And the beauty of this is, let's say we did too much, we could change the opacity down to 50 or whatever it is. So now you get 50% of what you originally did here. So let's go ahead and take that up all the way. And you could always go back to your properties panel and mess with this adjustment layer. So that's the beauty of it. You could come back and change it at any given time. You did not burn those changes into this image. So again, we're going to make this image better. So we're going to bring up the brightness. We could also bring up the contrast a little bit. Now, if you notice, it is still very red. So let's go ahead and add another adjustment layer instead of going to Image and our adjustments. So make sure we're selected on our background layer, our main image. So instead of going to Image Adjustments, at this point we should pretty much forget about these. Unless you really want to make something permanent. But from this point on, I highly suggest and recommend that you just use adjustment layers for anything. So let's go ahead and do a color balance at this point. And in our properties panel, we see that it's very red. So I want to tone that down. So let's go ahead and we're going to do it to, our midtones and our shadows. So let's start with our midtones. Let's bring that down a bit. And then next, we're gonna, since magenta falls in the reds, let's go ahead and remove a little bit of that as well. So let's bump it up just ever so slightly into the greens. And then there's some yellows in there too. So let's bump it up into the blues a little as well. And then now let's go ahead and do the shadows, and we're gonna do something similar. So we're gonna get a little bit away from the reds, not too much. Let's go into the greens ever so slightly, and let's go into the blues ever so slightly. So I feel like it's looking a little bit better, but we still need to bump up our brightness now. So let's go into our brightness and contrast adjustment layer. Let's bring up the brightness again. Okay, so now we could add another layer, adjustment layer. Let's go ahead and add the our levels. And let's go ahead and bring our midtones to the left a little. That way we get a little bit more color or more brightness on our midtones. Let's go ahead and bring our right slider to the left. somewhere around there, and let's bring our left slider to the right. So this means it's, you know, it's making our brighters brighter, our brights brighter, sorry, sort of like our light colors, all this. And then this one is our shadows, so let's make those a little bit darker. So that gives us a little more contrast. So now if you start to see, we probably went a little too far with our green. So let's go ahead and go to our color balance adjustment layer, and let's remove some of that from our midtones. And let's go into our shadows. We did that as well, so let's bring that up. And again, you know, we're not trying to make this perfect, we're just trying to make it better. So now if we turn all of these off, these eyes for all of our adjustment layers, we can see how far we went, and that's a dramatic improvement over what we originally had. I'm gonna go ahead and, you know, push our shadows more into the blues a little, just ever so slightly, and the same with our highlights. And this is all just fine tuning at this point. Let's go to our shadows, push that a little more to the cyan side, removing a little more red, and the same with our midtones. Go back to our brightness. We could bump that up, and I'm gonna go ahead and call that one done. So you guys can mess around with it. You can mess around with like different adjustment layers as well. So that's what a few of these do. So again, you know, preview this off or on. One thing that I forgot to do was save this as a Photoshop file, so we should have done that from the very beginning, but this is a good time to do it now. So let's go to File, Save As, and let's just change this to a Photoshop file, which it already was, under Format, or if you have a PC, it's going to say Type, and go ahead and save it. Make sure we are on our correct folder, so our touch-up photos. So I'm essentially saving everything within that same folder, just to make it easy. So I'm saving that, and I'm going to go ahead and close it. And let's go ahead and move on to our next one. So let's go to File, Open. And Photoshop remembers where you were last at. So now let's go ahead and open up this one. It's titled Alexander Anguero. It's going to be from Unsplash. So go ahead and open that one. So on this one, let's go ahead and zoom in. And let's go ahead and fix a few of the you know, blemishes or, you know, little marks on her face. So what we're gonna do is this time, let's go ahead and go to our maybe our spot healing brush tool. So it's nested under, we last used our red eye tool, so it's gonna be under there, and it's gonna be the first one. So the spot healing brush tool. I have a really small brush. It's a 10-point size. So let's go ahead and use our right or left brackets to make it bigger. So with this one, what we could do is we could, you know, just click on little spots. Since we're selected on our proximity match, what it's going to do is it's going to sample the areas around where we're fixing, and it's going to add some of that, you know, like texture, some of that look onto that space. So if I go ahead and do that, if you change it to content aware or create texture, it's going to do, you know, give you different things. So you see that one was like not a really good fix. So what I'm gonna do is Command or Control Z to undo it. I could do content aware as well and see what that gives me. So it looks pretty good. Only thing is that, you know, the angle of those hairs is going the wrong way, so we don't want to do that. So if we just do proximity match, I'm gonna make my brush a little smaller for this one, and that did a pretty good job in there. So essentially what we could do is just, you know, brush all of these in just to smooth out our skin a bit. You do not, this is more for like, you know, just spots. The name implies spot healing brush. So you're not going to do a big area, you know, things like this. And just click. Again, we're not looking for perfection. We just want to, make it a little better. So this works really good for like any any acne, you know, any small blemishes. And whoops, you see how that area didn't take a correct sample due to the hair strand that was right there. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that. Make my brush a little smaller and see how I could fix that. And actually this is a good opportunity to where we could use another tool. So let's try the patch tool. Let's see if this works out. I'm gonna use a patch tool, and then I'm gonna circle this area right here. So we make that selection, and then I'm gonna drag this down and kind of put it where that hair strand, see how it, you know, I could go off center. Let's try to match it to where it is roughly. Let it go. And yeah, maybe it's not the best. What we could do is go back to our spot healing brush tool and brush that in. And that looks a little bit better, and we still have our hair strand there. So maybe it looks a little bit bright. Another thing that we could do is use our clone stamp tool. So it's right here in our tools panel, and I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger. So what this one does is first you have to sample an area, and then it's gonna clone it. So I want to sample this area right here. So if I hold Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC, I get that little target, that little bullseye sign. I'll sample that area, so I'm going to click, and then I'm going to let it go, and then I could just brush right here. The issue with that is that I sampled this area and it happens to be a little darker than down here, so I'm getting that rounded shape from the brush. So again, now I could go back to my spot healing brush tool, and I could click on it a little bit and fix that area. And we'll see how that brought the hair back in. So essentially Photoshop is like sampling the area around. However, you know, if you have something that's completely different like the hair, it might throw it in there. So I'm going to undo it. And I think that looks pretty good. So take the time and go ahead and, you know, find little blemishes, areas that you want to fix. Use a multitude of tools, you know. So we learned about a little bit of all these, you know, the spot healing brush tool, healing brush tool, patch tool. The patch tool is more for like bigger areas. So, you know, and let's try this out. We might not get the effect that we want, but let's say this area is a little bit dark and we want to lighten it up a little. Let's drag that down. And yeah, maybe it's not exactly what we wanted to do. But go ahead and play around with these, you know. Let's say this little area, I want to sample this over here. So what we want to do is Command D on a Mac or Control D on a PC to deselect. Or if you forget that, just go to Select and deselect. It's grayed out right now because I don't have a selection anymore. I wouldn't say necessarily adjust her eyes because they already look very green. So if we go any further, you know, it might start looking a little fake. So, you know, I think that's a little bit of an improvement. Again, if you want to just practice with, you know, different things, let's go ahead and use our brush tool, and the same thing we did with that previous image with the eyes. Let's go ahead and make her lips like a little bit more red. So let's go ahead and get our brush tool, which is right here, and let's bring our opacity down to 10% again, and let's go ahead and select a red, maybe something a little bit more like burgundy. So we're going to go down in here and go ahead and click OK. I'm going to make my brush size a little bit bigger, so I'm just hitting my brackets, my right bracket, and I'm going to go ahead and paint this in. And if you want to give it another 10% layer, let's go ahead and do another one. So that enhances her lips a little bit. And obviously if we go, you know, several more clicks, it's going to look more like full-on makeup. You know, On that same note, if you wanted to add some, some eyeshadow or things like that, you could do that the same way. So now let's choose a different color. Let's say we wanted to go with like a purple or something. And on this one, I'm going to bring my opacity down even more. That way we're not affecting it a whole lot. We could do it lightly. Let's go down to about a 5%. And I'm going to increase the size of my brush with my bracket keys. And forgive me, ladies, if I don't know exactly where the makeup goes. I'm not a makeup artist, so I'm just gonna go ahead and brush here lightly, and we could do something like that. So another thing is we could go ahead and do some some color adjustments as well. So we could go ahead and add on this one. Let's go ahead and add some levels. And again, let's make those darks a little bit darker. So let's push this in a little bit, and let's make the brights a little bit brighter, or the lighter colors a little bit brighter. You don't want to go too much with either of these. Let me show you what happens. Eventually you're going to blow out the image, so it's going to be you're going to lose a lot of detail there. So let's just do a little bit. And on the same note, if you go too dark, you're going to lose a lot of that. So this is all just small adjustments. And then let's also move our midtones. So let's bring those to the left to make it a little bit brighter. And then we could make our darks darker. So there we go. So obviously those adjustments that we did on the lips and the eyes and all that skin is permanent now. The only thing that is not permanent is this contrast that we did with our levels. And you could see the difference, big difference there. So go ahead and take your time again. Make this image better. See what else you want to do to it. And go ahead and save it as a PSD file once you're done, and continue on to the next one. So make sure it's a Photoshop file, go ahead and save it, and then now we could close it. Okay, so to open up the next image, again, we're going to go to File, Open, and find the next image that we want to work on, which is this one. It is named Anna M. Nessis 33. Images that I downloaded from unsplash.com. Let's go ahead and open that one. So again, you guys should be fairly familiar with all these, the clone stamp tool, all these tools here, the spot healing brush, all of these. So go ahead and play around with those, try to make this image better again. Another thing that I'm going to do on this one is, you see these dark areas around her eyes, like right below. We want to tone those down a little. We don't want to completely get rid of them, but we want to just tone them down. So one thing that I'm going to do is to make this non-destructive. Just remember, to make something non-destructive, you're going to be working with layers. If you make it destructive, it's going to be working on the same layer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new layer, and I'm going to rename this. Let's see, iFix. You can name it anything as long as you know what it is. So what I'm going to do is get my brush tool, so this one, and then make sure opacity is good at either 5 or 10%. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to sample a color of her skin tone that is pretty close to that dark area. So I could sample actually by either clicking on the eyedropper tool, or if I just hold Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC, and I'm just going to click, for example, this area right here. So if you notice, that loaded up my brush with that skin tone. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase my brush size just a little bit, and what this is going to do is going to fog in a little bit of that skin tone. So I'm going to click once, let it go, click twice. I'll do this in layers, just a few clicks, and notice how it's toning it down. Now what I'm going to do on this side is I'm going to hold Option again to sample a color that's right here. So see that this one's a little bit darker, it changed. And again, I'm going to paint over this area a little bit. So now essentially what I did was I painted that onto a new layer, so on this iFix layer. And if I don't want to see where I'm at, I could go ahead and turn it off and on. So see how that looks completely better, even though it's, you know, we didn't get rid of them completely. So that's what we want to do. And then obviously the good old stuff, the spot healing brush tool, if we do this area. And actually, you saw what I just did there. I clicked it and nothing happened. It's because I'm on this iFix layer and there's essentially no pixels there. The pixels are here. So if you want to do that, we could go into our background layer and we could do it. Or let's try this. If I click on content aware, go to proximity match. Go ahead and click on sample all layers. What that does is it's going to sample all these layers. So now if I do this, it'll get rid of that within this iFix. So everything is going to be on that layer. And if you want to just work on the background layer, let's say we undid that, Command Z, go to our background layer, and I could do it here. Whoops, maybe it's a little too big. Let's zoom in, get that right. And remember, this is sampling the area around, so that's why we get those strands of the eyelashes. So now the fix is actually on the background and not on the iFix layer, so the iFix remains this. And then that change was permanent to the to that little area around her eye. Another thing that we want to do is let's go ahead and change her eye color actually. So we can do that by, again, using an adjustment layer. So let's go ahead and click here to create a new adjustment. And on this one, let's go ahead and do hue and saturation. So at this point, what we want to do is we want to mask just the eyes, so we know we're only affecting them and not anything else. Because if we start messing with, like, for example, the color slider here, see how it starts affecting everything? And we essentially don't want that. So we could always reset this doing Command or Control Z. It goes back to 0. So what we want to do is we want to click on our layer mask for our hue and saturation adjustment layer. Make sure we're selected on that. We want to make sure we have black and white on these colors. So just to refresh that, just go ahead and click on this little icon right here. And then what we want to do is hold Command or Control, Command for Macs, Control for PCs, and then click on Delete. So what that does is that's going to hide that's going to fill our adjustment layer mask with black, because it is the background color in our colors here. If we were to do Option and Delete, it's going to fill it with white. So just know Option and Delete fills it with white. Command and Delete or Control Delete fills it with black. On the same note, let me go back and emphasize that it is for Macs, it is Alt and Delete, so that it could show everything again. So let's go back to our Command or Control and Delete to fill this with black. So now we want it to show the eyes. So at this point, let's go ahead and click on our adjustment layer here, not the mask. And let's change the saturation. In the meantime, let's just change the saturation all the way up, and let's move this to a different color, just so we could see what we're doing. So I'm going to go into like the blues here, and the saturation is going to be at 100%. I'm going to go back and click on my layer mask, because that's where I'm going to work on. And then I'm going to get my brush tool. And then I'm going to change my opacity to 100%. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom into each one of these eyes. So I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller now. And I'm going to start brushing just the eye. And don't worry about the colors. They're gonna look a little funky right now. The reason being is when we push those sliders all the way, it's just so we knew exactly where we were at. And now if you want to, so actually I wanted our brush to be on white on top, because now we're showing, if we see right here, if we hold Option or Alt and we click this, we could see exactly where we're at. So now let's work on our mask here. So we have pretty much the eye. This area is showing what this adjustment layer is doing. If I hold Option or Alt and click on the layer mask again, now we can see we went a little bit far right here. So what we want to do is make our brush a little bit smaller. And now if we click X, it's going to switch our colors here, or you could just click on this. So hit X or switch these. Now we have black on as our foreground color. So now we're going to be painting in black. So that's going to be hiding. So I'm just going to go right along this edge to get rid of that yellow area. And that's good for now. So let's move over to our other eye. And now let's switch it to white again, because now we want to show what this layer, what this adjustment layer is doing. And I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger. Go right up to the edge here. If you go over a little, it's okay. We could always come back and hide it again. And then I'm going to switch it by hitting X. And now we're back on our black foreground color. Make our brush a little smaller. And then just fine tune this area. Okay. Now I'm going to zoom out a bit. Obviously that looks really fake. It looks cool, but it looks really fake. So let's go back into, we're done with our layer mask for that adjustment layer. So now let's click on the adjustment layer itself. Let's bring the saturation back to 0 to get back to our original one. And what we could do now is we could move this slider over and we could change the eye color. So let's go, I'm going to go over to like a little bit of the greenish. And now what you could do is you could, you know, increase the saturation, let's say. Again, you don't want to do it too much. And you can make these eyes darker, or you can make them lighter. So go ahead and mess with these. You know, go different ways. You know, make it a believable color, obviously. That's why I went with like a greenish. And I could zoom out. And now I could turn this layer off and on. And you can see we went from blue eyes to green eyes. And obviously if you go down to bring the lightness all the way down, you know, we could give her almost black eyes with a little bit of a hint of a color. So we could slide this over and we could still keep her eyes like almost with that bluish cast, except, you know, have them dark. So we could do that as well. Again, take the time to, you know, mess with the colors, mess with the brightness, give her some contrast, change it around, you know, fix all of her blemishes, and then once you're done, go ahead and save it again. So go to File, Save As, and make sure it's a Photoshop layer, and go ahead and save it. We can close that one, and we're ready for our next one. Okay, so next we're going to open up, go to File, Open, and open up this Eric Lucatero image. Go ahead and open it. And the same thing with all the tools that we've learned. Go ahead and clean up his face a little bit. You know, maybe change his eye color. Fix anything that you feel like that could be fixed. If you want to, go ahead and change the background color. So actually, let's go ahead and do that one. So one thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get this hue and saturation adjustment layer. So get that new one, and then we're gonna create a mask so that it doesn't affect him, it only affects the background. What we're gonna do is we're gonna push the hue a different way and bring up the saturation. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna mask around him to delete that part of the mask. So let's go ahead and zoom in, and we really can't tell where the shoulder is here. So we're gonna have to just kind of make it up. So, and this is a good chance to like practice with your pen tool. If you were in my previous class, you should know how to use it, but maybe you need a little bit more practice. So I'm gonna get my pen tool, and I'm just gonna estimate right here where his shoulder's at. We can't tell because of the darkness, so I'm gonna go ahead and go here. I'm gonna zoom in. Remember, it's just click and drag. And if you want to get rid of that point, or get rid of this curve, if you hold Option or Alt, that stops me there, and then I could just go right along the edge of his face. Now obviously it's going to be hard to pick all these spots in here, so we're just going to do like a rough selection of his hair. Make sure you do not go into any of these like little areas where you could see the background. So make this very rough. And once you get to about this area where, you know, you could kind of get something solid, we'll go ahead and, you know, start working in this area. This doesn't have to be perfect as long as you know, stay within the black. Don't make selections out here, because then it's not going to select that area. So let me do Command Z to undo that, and just stay within the black a little bit. So hair is always a little bit tough, but you know, with what we're doing, it's no big deal. So then now I'm going to mask around his ear. And again, if I get to a corner where I want to not continue the curve, I just hold Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC. Click on it, and then I could, you know, change directions from that point. So we usually do that at like sharp points, sharp corners, such as here. And do that again right here. See how it starts getting a little fuzzy? Let's stay within that like black or darker line. Let's zoom out a little bit, and we'll just complete this outside and then finish it off. We could tell it's finishing off because we get that little circle in our pen tool. And then if we right click within here and we go to make selection, and this make selection dialog box comes up, let's go ahead and feather it 1 radius. That just gives you a little bit of feathering, so it's not such a harsh line. Click OK. And now what we want to do is we want to use this selection to remove that part from the layer mask. So if we click on the layer mask here, and then we want to make sure that our foreground color is black. If it is not, you know, switch it to black here. Or if you have different colors such as blue, red, or whatever it might be, go ahead and click on these first, this little icon, to make sure it's black and white, and then we'll switch it to black. And now if you hold Option or Alt and then hit delete, it's going to erase that part of the layer mask in the, or that part of the selection in the layer mask. And then we could deselect that by going to Select and Deselect, or hitting Command or Control D. So now what we have right here, this adjustment layer, it only affects the background. So if I go ahead and click on this one, you know, I could change the background and it only affects that. Now if you see right here in the ear area, my selection was still pretty harsh. So right there we could see like a big difference going into the ear. So what I could do is now I could, you know, go ahead and make something drastic again to where we could see it, and we see a little bit right here. What we could do is we could go back into our mask, and if we select our brush tool, make sure it is a hardness of 0, and then we'll bring up the size just a little bit, and let's zoom into that ear. And if we're on black again, we're hiding, so we're gonna hide that, what this is doing, and we could kind of just go over the ear right here, and that'll make it look a little more natural. if I go too much here, I could always click on X to switch this from black to white, and now I could paint the opposite way to where now I'm bringing back, since I'm in white, I'm bringing back this hue and saturation layer, which is obviously a very drastic color change. And you see how I got a little bit here on the cheek. On this one, let's go ahead and hide, because we want to start hiding it over here. So we could click there to switch it to black, or hit X and slowly start going along this edge. And since it's a soft brush, what it's going to do is it's going to create that soft, like, little feathering. And if I hit X again, I could go back the other way, and I could start, you know, showing that again, showing the that color adjustment. So you could fine tune it that way. And let's see right there, I accidentally brushed it while I was showing, so in white. So I'm going to Command or Control Z to undo that. Hit X to switch it to black, and then I'm gonna now feather this out a little bit. There's other ways to make these selections feather a little bit more, but for now this is a good way to, you know, get used to the brushes and manually coming in and doing adjustments like this. So again, go ahead and change the background with something like that. And then go ahead and fix some of the blemishes on his face and see what you could do with it. And then we'll go ahead and save this as a PSD file, and then we'll continue on the next one. So File, Save As, sure, in Photoshop, save, and then we could close it. So let's go ahead and open up the new one. So File, Open. It's going to be this file, Matt Maloney. I'm imagining these are the photographers that submitted these photos to unsplash.com. Go ahead and open it, and let's see what we could do there. So go ahead and try to take care of, you know, like these little spots on her arms. Try to get rid of that. You know, some of the acne on her face, some of that. One thing I do want to show you is, again, with those adjustment layers, usually what you could do, like, let's say if we look at her eyes, they're very red, and what we could do is, again, get the brush, fill it with white, and do, you know, a light opacity, and we could start painting these. However, that's destructive again, so we don't want to do that. So I'm going to undo, Command Z, and I'm going to use the adjustment layers with the mask to my advantage. So what I'm going to do is get my adjustment layers and open up. On this one, let's go ahead and do color balance. So now we know we need to get away from reds, because it is red. So usually if we go, yeah, let's keep it in our midtones, and let's go this way, go into the cyans a little bit, and then go to our highlights, and then go to our cyans a little bit. So already you could see it's making these eyes a little bit whiter, or the whites of the eyes. So if I turn that off and on, we could see, however, it's affecting our whole image. So that's where the masking comes in, to where we're going to do it to where it only affects the whites of the eyes. So again, we're going to click on our layer mask, and we want to hide it everywhere, correct? Because we don't want this effect to show on anything. So then we're going to make sure that we have black selected as our foreground color. And if we hold Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC and hit Delete, that's going to black out our layer mask. So none of this is showing. And now what we're going to do is zoom in to one of the eyes, get our brush tool. Now we want it to show, so we're going to switch our color to white. And for this one, we are going to change our opacity to 100%. And let's adjust our brush size accordingly, and then just start brushing in the eyes. So you'll see it starts getting rid of that red. I'm going to make my brush a little smaller just to go around this area. You know, make it bigger as you see fit. Go all the way into the shadow area, because that still has reds. And now if you turn this layer off and on, you could see that drastic improvement. And we're going to go over here to this eye, and we're going to do the same thing. We'll make our brush smaller. And then pick it up back over here again. Now one thing you notice is it almost desaturates it just a little bit. So where all it does is it removes the whites. But now, let's say we want to go ahead and make it brighter, just the eyes as well. You know, we're only focusing on this. Let's go ahead and make another adjustment layer, and let's go ahead and click on brightness. And let's go ahead and increase the brightness. However, you see if I go all the way, it's increasing the brightness of the whole image. We do not want that. So let's just go a little bit. And again, we want to mask out those eyes. However, we already have the mask, so why would we mask again when we could just copy a mask? So the way we copy a mask is if we click on this layer mask from where we had already masked out the whites of the eyes, and if we hold Alt on a PC or Option on a Mac and just drag, make sure you drag the layer mask up into this one, and it says if you want to replace the layer mask, which, you know, it was all white, it's showing all of that effect that we did, the brightness effect. Let's go ahead and replace it. And it seems it didn't pick it up. Okay, there it goes. So click yes, and now we have this one. To double check, if you hold Option or Alt, Option on a PC, Alt on a Mac, sorry, excuse me, the other way around. If you hold Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC, if you click on these, you could see our layer mask. And you could see what's hidden and what is showing in white. So I'll turn that back on. So now we could turn this off and on. So we have technically two adjustment layers affecting that. So if we turn both off, we could see that makes her eyes pop dramatically. Now let's say if I click on my brightness, and let's say I had done it too much. Let's say I was way up here. That obviously starts looking real fake because, you know, nobody has super white eyes like that. So we could always tone it down here. Another thing you could do is, like, let's say this color balance. Let's say you went too far and you took off too many colors. You could change the opacity and bring it back down. So if we bring it 50%, that's going to bring in a little bit of red. So it might look a little more natural. And if you take it down to 0%, where you're going to go back to like basically not showing this adjustment layer. So that just, you know, blends this at whatever percentage you have. So I'm going to leave these at 100. And again, you should know how to do the rest. You know, clone out any little areas that you might see fit. Feel free to try to, you know, add some lipstick to her, or it looks like she's wearing lip gloss or something, you know, change the color, give her some eyeshadows or something, you know. Feel free to have fun with it. And go ahead and save it and then move on to the next one. So we'll go to File, Save As. Make sure you're Photoshop and save it and close it. Okay, so again, let's open up the next image. Go ahead and select this one. This is a Nikolay V. Bornov. Go ahead and open. And again, from the very get-go, let's go ahead and, you know, add some brightness or contrast. So let's go ahead and add brightness. And maybe we could add a little contrast here as well. So you could already see this picture starts looking a lot better. And then at this point, again, go ahead and try to fix any of the acne. It's not going to be perfect. Try to make it better. And we'll go ahead and save it and continue to the next one. So I already showed you guys several techniques. You know, make the whites of the eyes a little brighter. You know, fix any of like these scars, the scar tissue. You know, he has like a little indentation here on his forehead. So go ahead and clean this image up a little bit. If you want to, the whole background looks black and white. So if you want to, you could add some colorizing to it. Figure out what you could do to make it better based on all the tools we have reviewed. So let's go ahead and save that one. Save it as a Photoshop file. Close that one. And then go ahead and open up the next one. So again, this is just going to be, very repetitive, but you're going to, pick up the tools, get familiar with these. Let's go ahead and open up this red eye effect. And what I'm going to do is, remember, this has the red eyes, and we have that red eye tool. So let's go ahead and find that under our spot healing brush. Go ahead and click on the red eye tool. That automatically fixes that. And on this one, there's not a whole lot, there's not a whole lot of detail, but maybe try to tone down some of the shine on her eyes, on her lips as well. See what you could do to make it better, add some contrast to it. So I showed you guys how to add contrast with, the brightness and contrast tool, but you could also do, let's delete that adjustment layer. We're essentially doing the same thing when we're playing with the levels. When we're bringing in the darks and bringing in the lights, we're creating contrast as well. So you could see that here. So those are two ways of adding contrast, and then see what else you could do with this one. Any crazy ideas that you may have. Just have fun with it. And let's go ahead and save that one. So file, save as Photoshop file, close it, and let's move on to the next one. Now let's open up this river. So now you see this one is very, it's very bright here. We do have some shadows here. It does look a little desaturated. So from the get-go, let's open up a hue and saturation adjustment layers. Let's bump up the saturation a little bit. So that gives us a little bit more colors. See how those greens start to pop? We start to get these warms where the sun is hitting this area. Let's turn. It brings up these like yellow flowers on these trees. We get a few more blues in the river. So already it's looking better. And then let's go ahead and add our levels adjustment layer. And again, make the darks a little darker, make the whites a little lighter, and then go ahead and slide our midtones. If you slide our midtones all the way to the left, you start getting white. All the way to the right, you start getting very dark. So, find a place where you like it. I'm gonna go with that. Of course, I always like to turn it off and on. That way we could see the difference. Now, if you notice one thing, when I turn this off and on, when I turn it off, it shows a little bit more of these mountains in the back. So that I like. But when I turn it on, it makes all of this brighter, which I like. So one thing that I could do is I could hide that area of this adjustment layer so that I get some of those mountains back. So I'm gonna do that with my brush. So I'm gonna select my brush tool. Right now I'm loaded up with white, so it'll show. My mask is already all white. I could tell that by holding Option and Alt and clicking on the layer mask. So it's all white, so it's already all showing. So obviously I want to hide. So if I switch this to a black color, and then I'm gonna increase my brush size. And if I just start brushing in this area, it brings back those mountains. And if you see here, in my layer mask, that's the area that I'm showing. So that area technically stays the same because nothing happens. Whoops. But everything else changes. So we could see that. Now I think this river could benefit from a little bit more contrast. So I'm going to add another levels adjustment layer, and this one I only want it to affect the river. So I'm gonna adjust this one to where I like it with what it's doing to the river. Maybe see I add more blacks, so don't worry about what it's doing on everything else because I'm gonna mask all that out. But I feel like that makes my river pop a little bit more. And I'm gonna move my midtones to the right a little. and I'm gonna increase my whites a little bit. So now what I'm gonna do is click on my layer mask for this adjustment layer, and I want to delete it, so, or I want to hide everything for now so it doesn't affect anything. So I'm holding, if I hold Option, since I have black loaded here, I hold Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC, and then if I hit delete, it's gonna hide all of this. And then now with my brush tool, I want to switch it to showing, because I want to specifically select the river. So I'm on my brush tool on white, so it shows. And I just start painting this area of the river. So that whole effect is only affecting this area. And as I come here, I'm gonna decrease my my brush and go into there. So now, if I want to see exactly where I'm at on my levels over here, if I hold Option and click on my river, if I hit Option or Alt and I hit on my layer mask, I could see this area. So I could see I'm missing a little bit here. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that in. These little spots here. And now I can see when I turn this off and on, it only affects that river layer. And I feel like that adds a lot more to it. And let's see. We could also change, a whole lot of this. Like, feel free to play around with different adjustment layers, different masking. Let's go ahead and add a, for example, if you want to make it black and white at this point, you could click on this black and white adjustment layer, and you could mess around with these settings. I didn't want to necessarily do that, but that's something you could do. I obviously want to see you, mostly play around with masking and then play around with making the image looking better. So I'm going to delete that one. You could also add one of these photo filters. We have these photo filters in the adjustment layers. And for example, that one makes it warm. So if you go into your properties panel, you could choose from these different ones, and you could, you could increase the density of it. So if you go all the way, you start distorting it a lot, or not distorting it, you start adding a lot more warmth. So you don't want to do it too much, but let's say you do want a warmer look, you could do that. There's also cooling filter, so it'll go the opposite, so that's gonna make it look more like the blues and all that. And again, you could turn this off and on to see the difference. Let's say it's too much, I could decrease the opacity, so I have somewhere in the middle. And then at this point, if I wanted to, I could go back to any of these, like my hue and saturation. And I could increase my saturation a little bit more. I could make it lighter or darker here as well, lighter or darker. I could go back to my levels and adjust it further. So that's the beauty of adjustment layers. It's nothing's permanent. You could go back to each one of these and change it. So feel free to do so. And then let's say let's say I wanted to change the color completely of my river in that area. So remember, I already have that mask. So what I could do is I could add another, let's say I want to add a hue and saturation layer, and then I could copy this layer mask from the river. So I click on that layer mask, and then if I hold Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC and drag that up to that new hue and saturation layer we made, and we want to say yes, we want to replace the masks. So now they both have the same mask. So now if I go into my hue and saturation layer, if I change the hue, see how it only affects the river. Now if I zoom in, I could see that I missed a few spots, and that's just because I brushed it in very loosely. So I'm missing some of those areas. So I could always go back, and I'm in whites with my brush, and I could always paint those spots in just a little bit, to really get to the end there. Now obviously this doesn't look real, but it's good for the example of, it's showing you what it's doing exactly. And then obviously once I get into here, it's gonna be, selecting those tree branches as well. So this is why, you know, you don't want to go too far from, obviously, from the colors of actual nature. So maybe that it makes it a little bit more blue, and then you can't tell too much, you know, with these branches if somebody was to see it. So yeah, again, feel free to mess with it, punch up the colors, all that. So now if we, you know, turn off all of these adjustment layers, we could see the original and how we brought it back to life by adding all of these adjustment layers. So that's a little bit about, you know, photo retouching, since mostly we've been working on faces and things like that. So let's go ahead and close this one. Well, yeah, we want to save it. We forgot to save it as a Photoshop file, and then make sure we're in Photoshop and go ahead and save it. Now let's go ahead and go to the next one. So file, open. Now if you notice the next one, I purposely left it as a web P file. So that means Photoshop is not going to open it. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit cancel, and we're going to go to our folder where we have it. And let's find that one. So it's this save under exposed before WebPX file. So pretty much when you download images from Google, some of them will be JPEGs and some of them will be in this new format that I believe Google created. Photoshop as of now does not read these as images that it could edit. So we have to work around that. I'm sure, you know, eventually at some point Adobe's probably working on it right now, working on a way to be able to bring these photos in. But it's essentially just, you know, this new format that photos are being saved as, and, you know, just so that they don't take up a lot of space. So one thing that we could do in order to convert that image is we could go to cloudconvert.com, go ahead and hit return. And right here, we could turn that file into a JPEG. So what we're going to do is select our image from a desktop or wherever we put it for that matter. So we're going to click on this red button, select file from my computer. And now we're going to go ahead and find it. I know it's in my desktop. So I'm going to go to desktop, and I know it is in my Sam Limon folder. So I have several Sam Limons, but this is the one. And then it's in my touch-up photos folder, and we're going to scroll down, and here it is. That's save under exposed before 1200.webp file. And I'm going to go ahead and click open. And then I'm going to switch this area, convert to. What do we want to convert it to? We're going to convert it to a JPEG. And then we're going to hit convert. So now what it does, it gives us a JPEG. I'm going to go ahead and download it, and I could close out of this. So I'm going to open up my folder where all my images are at, and then I'm going to open up my downloads folder, and I'm going to drag that in. So it's going to have the same name except for now it's a JPEG. And just to keep organized, I'm going to have everything together. So see, there's my WebP that we had, and then here is our converted JPEG. Well, we could close down our downloads folder, and then let's go to our Photoshop, and now we could open that one. So file, open, and we're obviously going to open up our new JPEG that we just created. So whenever you guys download any images from Google, if you run into this this scenario where you save them and then you can't open them from your desktop, just go ahead and go to that cloudconvert.com and go ahead and convert them. And right here, first thing we notice is it's underexposed, so we could expose it more. These are photography terms, so you know, so when it's too dark, when it's too bright, if you underexpose it a lot, you know, you could lose a lot of detail, and if you overexpose it, the same thing, you know, you could lose a lot of detail. So photographers try to shoot everything, you know, at a good happy medium where where you have a lot of detail, and then you could come in and manipulate the images if you have to. So for now, we could actually deal with brightness and contrast, or we could click on exposure. Let's go ahead and use exposure this time. And this one's real simple. You know, we could increase the exposure. See if I overexpose it, I start losing detail, and this is all just white. We no longer have skin tones. If I underexpose it, you know, I start getting into blacks, and then I start losing a lot of detail. So you want to just be mindful of, you want to push it, but don't go too far to where you start losing details. And this isn't the best image quality to begin with. So we don't have a lot of room to play with this. You could mess with the offset, but I usually don't, you know, depending if I need it. But usually I'm just gonna mess with the exposure, because from the beginning we knew it was underexposed. So now we could see the difference of what we did. Again, let's say we like everything else, except I'm looking at maybe I overexposed the forehead or the cheeks a little bit, and I want to darken those areas a bit. I could just go into this mask, and then I could get my brush tool and I could switch it to black to make sure I'm hiding. If I start clicking, that's gonna hide it way too much, and that's gonna take me back to what I originally had, right? So we don't want to do that. So I'm gonna do Command or Control Z to undo. I'm gonna bring my opacity down to maybe about 10, and then I'm lightly gonna hit these spots if I think they're too bright. And see how that brings back just a little bit of what was there before. Now if I go ahead and hold Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC, and if I click on the layer mask, it's very faint, but I could see these areas where I hid that effect a little bit. But that's just enough to where I'm thinking it brought back some of that detail. It's not so white now. And again, see what else you could do with this one. You know, with everything you learned. She has a little blemish there on her chin. Maybe try to change her eye color or something, or add some color to the background, you know, using our masking tools. So get familiar with it, and then again, always save that one as a Photoshop file and move on to the next one. Okay, so let's open up the next one. And this one's going to be an image that's overexposed. So it's this stngo.jpg. We're going to open this one. So first thing we notice is like the top is a little bit washed out. So, you know, the sun's right behind. It's causing glare in the camera. So we're losing a lot of detail. Unfortunately on these, you know, I mean, yes, you could bring them back somewhat, but again, you're not going to get perfect. So let's try to take care of that first. So I'm going to go to brightness and contrast, add an adjustment layer for my layers panel. And I don't necessarily want to go brighter, because then that's going to make all of this brighter. Let me show you what happens there. So I'm losing even more detail. What I wanted to do was add a little bit of contrast. So I'm going to leave this as it was, and then I'm going to increase a little bit of contrast. I'm going to go up to about 30. So not a whole lot, but enough. And then what I want to do is I want to target this area, this top area, and not affect the bottom. Not yet, not with any changes. Okay, so this time what we're going to do is we're going to add an adjustment layer, and this time we're going to go to the curves. The curves is my favorite for designing. It's kind of my go-to, as opposed to all these ones that I've been showing you, because it kind of encompasses most of these in one. So I mean, I could change the brightness from there. I could change levels, exposure. I could do some vibrance. This is pretty much like a saturation, hue and saturation, and color balance. So first things first, again, I want to bring this point in a little bit, and that's going to make my darkers dark. If I bring this point in, it's going to make my whiters white. We don't want that. Not yet, because we only want to affect this. Right now we're affecting the whole image. But let's go ahead and bring our midtones down just ever so slightly. Maybe I want to bring this back this off a little bit. So now you can see what that did, was that gave us a little bit of darkness. Now we want some of the darkness on top, but not too much, and we don't want to affect the bottom. So what we want to do is go into our layer mask, and then if we hold Option or Delete, since we have black on our foreground color, if I hold Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC, and if I hit Delete, it's going to hide it. And like I said, I wanted to target this top area but not the bottom, so I could always go in and use my gradient tool, and I'm gonna click in that area. Let me do this again. Click this area right here where we see our colors, and then we get this gradient editor. And what we want to do is, I already have this set up. If you don't have it, go to your basics folder here and click on this one, which is, it goes from black to pretty much transparent, and then go ahead and click OK. Now if it's going from black to transparent, my layer mask is already all black, so it's already hidden. What we want to do is the opposite. We want to show. So if we click X, basically to switch these colors, this switches this to white. So now it goes from showing to not doing anything. So now if I click from the top down here, what it does is it starts showing in the top part whatever my adjustment layer did, but it's not doing it at the bottom. So if I turn this off and on, see how it only affects the top, and that slowly starts bringing that back. Like I said, it's not going to be 100%, but it's going to be better. And then this was my overall. So here's another one, another new one. Well, not new, but one that I haven't showed you guys, is go to your vibrance. And again, if you add vibrance, you could add a little bit of saturation. Not too much, because you see they start turning red. We don't want too much. We could add vibrance. Another thing that you could do is, we could make this sharper as well. So let's zoom in a little. So let's go ahead and go to our filters. Whoops. Make sure we're selected on our main image right here, background, and go to filter, go to sharpen, and then unsharp mask. And remember, now we're going back up here, so this would be a permanent change, but since we're doing sharpening, it's okay. So let's go ahead and mess with these settings. The settings that I showed up for me was 50% at 1 pixel radius, and we could turn off the preview and turn it on, and we could see, you know, this one doesn't do a whole lot of sharpening, so you could always increase the amount. You could increase the radius. You don't want to go too much, because again, it starts looking fake. So see, that is a big difference. So I'm going to bring the radius back down to maybe about 2. And let's see what it looks like with like maybe a 75% amount. So we'll turn that off and on. And I feel like that adds a good amount of radius. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And zoom out again. So see what else you could do. See if you could figure out how to like maybe change the white in his shirt to something else. Or, you know, make these different. Feel free to play around with these. But the main thing that I wanted to show you is you could do a gradient here on the layer masks as well to target a certain area as opposed to masking, and that way that kind of brings this whole area together. We could keep pushing this as well, you know, by bringing this down a bit. And feel free to mess with these. In the next one, I'll show you a little bit more about the colors within the curves layer adjustment. So go ahead and save that one when you're happy. Save as. Make sure it's a Photoshop file. Save it, and we'll go close it and move on to the next one. Okay, so let's open up our last one. Go to File, Open, and let's scroll down and let's open up this washed out 2020 promo photo. Go ahead and open it. I always forget to do this, but from the get-go, let's go ahead and save it as a JPEG. So File, Save As, sorry, as a Photoshop file, and save that. I feel like the first one and this last one were the only ones that I did with a saving them as PSDs from the very beginning, but that's totally fine. So again, this one's a little washed out, especially in this area, but that's fine. You know, we could get a little bit of the detail back by adding some contrast. So we're gonna, again, go ahead and go to our adjustment layers, and let's do that again with our curves. So with our curves, let's go ahead and bring in, you know, these darks. And I'm gonna leave the brights here. So I'm not gonna push these this way and leave those there. However, I am gonna bring down these midtones a little bit. Now, remember when I mentioned that these curves also encompass our color balance. So if we go, this is affecting our RGB, so it's all three colors in one. However, we could target specific colors, so we could target our reds. And think of this left area as our shadows, so our dark areas. This middle area is our midtones, and on the right side is our brights. So I could increase the reds in our midtones and see how that starts increasing a lot of reds. Let's say I do this and I go too much and I want to take it back. I could always go back to about the center line. However, if I don't get it close enough, or if I'm not sure, I could always just drag this out and let it go, and then it'll snap back to like original. One thing that I could do is I could increase the reds in the dark areas, and I could increase the darks in the light areas. Or I could remove the reds in the light areas, and the opposite of red in this case would be like blue, so it starts turning that cyan. I could do it in the midtones, or I could do it in the shadows. And obviously I could make, you know, like an S-curves. Like I could, for example, I could remove some reds from the dark areas, so it's going to make it more blue. I could add some reds in the midtones. So see, notice like how his face, his arms start getting a little bit more red. And then I could reduce the reds in the highlights. Or I could go, you know, vice versa. I could go this way, and whoops, and that way, so I could essentially create somewhat of an S-curve. However, once you start messing with it in certain ways, then it's going to look, you know, completely different. It's not going to look natural unless you're going for some sort of artistic look. Then, you know, feel free to do something like that. So I could always, you know, reset it to what I originally had by clicking on this button. So and notice how that also reset everything. So that reset my RGB colors. So we did not want to do that. So bring this down here. I could bring this up here. I could also do something like that. And then I could affect my greens as well. Besides my reds, I could, so if I decrease green, I'm also going to get more of those reds. And again, you could play with it in these different areas, you know, the darks or the lights. And that's adding green, that's subtracting green. This one's adding green on the darks, subtracting green. So everything on the left side of this diagonal line, you know, you're adding green. I could add greens to my shadows, my midtones, and my highlights. So obviously my image starts looking very green. You know, or go back to my normal state. And if I subtract green from everything on the same note, my darks and my lights, then it's going to turn this color. Well, let's take those back. And then you could you know, pretty much make out that it's going to do the same thing with the blues. You know, I could add blues to this, to the darks and to the lights, or I could, if I subtract blues, I'm going into the yellows. So let's say this image was a little too blue for my taste and the midtones. So if I wanted to subtract some blues, it's going to turn more yellow. If that's the look I was going for, I could do that as well. So feel free to play with these. You know, mix this up with some masks. So maybe you could turn, you know, the background one color and then him separate color where you add more reds or remove reds or whatever. So and then another thing, again, this whole area looks a little bit light, so we could do a separate curves adjustment layer. So you could have plenty of these, and let's say this one I want to use to only target this area that's very bright. So I could be in my RGB and I could, you know, tone this down, or actually make it a little bit darker, make the highlights a little bit darker as well, and the midtones. And then again, I could hold Option, sorry, this time I'm gonna hold Command and Delete because black is my background color. And if I am on my layer mask, if I hold Command or Control and then hit Delete, it's gonna fill this with black. And instead of doing the gradient this time, what I could do is get my brush, and yeah, opacity of 10 is good, and I'm gonna make this brush really big, maybe about there, so that looks to be about 300. And I could start brushing this in white, so that we start showing a little bit here, and maybe a little bit into his face, and that starts bringing in some color there. So now I could turn this off and on and see that I only affected that area, because if I hold Option on a Mac or Alt on a PC, if I click on that curves layer mask, this is what's being affected. All of this isn't showing right here. So yeah, and again, feel free to zoom in, maybe you know, maybe fix that little scar on his elbow, maybe take care of a few of these spots on his arms. If his face has any blemishes, maybe you can make the whites of his eyes a little bit brighter, you know, give him a little bit of color on his eyes, and go ahead and save it as a Photoshop file again. It's Photoshop, save it. No, it's telling us that we already did it. So see what happens when you don't remember. So I could go ahead and replace it, or hit cancel, and then just save it, because it's already a Photoshop file. So instead of save as, we just do our regular save. So now it saves over our Photoshop file. So at the end, I'm gonna have you guys package all of these. If you want to just put, I'm just gonna require the Photoshop files. And then we'll go ahead and print these out and show them in class, and we'll go ahead and show the befores and afters. So that's it for this tutorial, and we'll see you on the next one.